The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Hello, everyone.
If you're new to our podcast, Beth and I cover topics each week that piqued our interest, from the supernatural to the naturally weird.
And last week, our interest was piqued quite a bit because we did 2 episodes, our regular episode, and we did an episode for our premium bonus episode subscribers. So if you've been holding off on subscribing for our bonus content, you might want to check it out.
Yeah, for just the low price of $3, you get a full-length episode of stuff we don't usually cover in our regular episodes. We tend to focus on things that are bizarre or strange, a little bit like we usually do, but we leave a lot of stuff in that we normally, edit out for a variety of reasons.
We've also started posting little weird facts on Facebook daily, so check out our Facebook page. There are some really great people there, and we love to know what you think.
All right, so let's get into tonight's topics.
It's your turn to go first this week.
Does it really matter who goes first?
Well, we've always traded off, where one of us goes first one week, and then the next week the other one starts.
All right, sit back and I'll start us off tonight. The year is 1976. E50 is a dark, lonely stretch of road off Route 66 in the northeast corner of Oklahoma. Your car is the only one on the desolate, wooded road, and as you glance at the dashboard clock, you realize it's nearly midnight and you should probably bring your date home because you don't want to piss off her parents. But this is one of the most notorious lovers' lane spots around, and you were quite surprised when your date suggested it. So despite being a bit wary of getting her home late and just how isolated this road is, you pull over. It's such a beautiful night. Your headlights cast a dim glow off into the distance. All you can see is more dirt road and more trees. You're just about to flick your headlights off when suddenly a bright light pops up out of nowhere at the other end of the road. Thinking it's another car, you groan because you're hoping to get a little action with your date. So you grumble and moan and prepare to pull back onto the road. But as you peer at it, the light seems to get closer and closer. It's just a single light and it appears almost green. It can't be headlights even if the oncoming car has a headlight out. What is it? You mumble. You stare at it as it bobs along the road, sometimes seeming to swing from side to side, until inexplicably it breaks into 2 lights. You blink, startled. Did you see that? You ask, taking her eyes off it for just a second to see your date. She nods, not turning her head. She's too busy staring at these 2 separate lights, which are now about 20 yards away. They're bright, and you estimate they're probably each about the size of a basketball. Instantly, they move so that instead of bobbing side by side, they are suddenly one on top of the other vertically. You both stare transfixed. Neither one of you have moved. Not yet. But as the strange lights continue to get closer, your date whispers, "What do we do?" You have 2 options. Stay motionless and see what happens, or put the pedal to the metal and get the hell out of there. You don't like the idea of just staying put. It could be anyone out on this road playing pranks on teenagers. But you doubt you can do a U-turn fast enough, so you go for option 2, meet it head on. As you pull back onto the road, your eyes still on the lights, which have merged back into one and seem to be moving away from you, back the way it came. Without thinking, you hit the gas, and as you lurch forward, the light just vanishes. No matter how hard you look, your eyes darting in all directions in front of you, it's just gone. You're still expecting to see someone, a solid figure standing by the side of the road, or maybe two people, each holding some sort of flashlight. But neither you or your date see a thing. Until you happen to glance in your rearview mirror, that is. And there, bobbing in the middle of the road, right where your car had been seconds before, is the strange light. Without warning, it seems to explode into a shower of sparks and then darkness. These are the types of experiences people have been having on E50, otherwise known as the Devil's Promenade, for almost 150 years. And the light you just saw was the Hornet Spook light. Now, the Hornet Spook light has several other names. Sometimes it's referred to as just the Spook light or the Ghost light, the Joplin Ghost light, the Ozark Spook light, and my personal favorite, the Devil's Jack-o'-lantern.
That is a cool one.
I know. It has so many different names because the area in which it's spotted encompasses both Oklahoma and Missouri, and E50 is a road that connects both states. Joplin is the nearest city to the area in Missouri, and Hornet was a nearby town in Oklahoma, so it's kind of cool that both states share the phenomenon. Even Kansas puts their 2 cents in every once in a while, since E50 is right up in that tiny corner where all 3 states meet. But here's the thing, the first published account of the spook light came out in 1881, long before cars ever existed anywhere near the back roads of Oklahoma. And Route 66, the nearest highway, wouldn't exist for another 45 years. So what were people seeing? What are they still seeing? It's not hard to find dozens of very detailed first-person accounts of spook lights on the Devil's Promenade. The awesome Legends of America website has several of them. But first, I want to take a look at what people are generally seeing, what the legends are surrounding the light, and what scientific experiments have been done to try and debunk it. In general, the light is described as a smoldering orb of light, or ball of fire, and it ranges from the size of a baseball to about the size of a basketball. It spins, bobs up and down, and sometimes split into 2 or 3 separate orbs. It makes dancing movements at times, or it sways from side to side, and it's been known to whiz by at incredible speeds. It's often spotted at the center of the road, but then it rises up to the tree line and disappears. People have said it's white, orange, red, blue, or even green, and it appears between 10 p.m. and midnight on random nights, no matter the weather. Rain doesn't seem to make a difference either. Because of its bizarre movements, the spook light has been tied to a whole handful of legends. Because the light has been reported to bob up and down, there are 2 stories tied to it with native origins. The first is that the light is from 2 Quapaw young people, a man and a woman, who fell in love and married against her father's wishes. In his anger, he sent his warriors to chase the young couple into the woods, where they jumped to their deaths, holding hands into the spring river. The bobbing of the light could be a torch, and since it sometimes splits into 2, people say it's the doomed couple. Now, in my opinion, that's a pretty cliché story at this point. I feel like we've heard that story before over and over and over.
Right, it's pretty generic.
That it is. Another legend is that the light bobs up and down because it's a Quapaw or Osage Indian holding a torch in order to locate his severed head.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. How would he see it if his head's severed?
I don't know.
Again, kind of generic and not particularly respectful of the Quapaw or Osage people.
No, not at all.
In fact, I came across an article where a member of the Quapaw tribe said he thought these explanations were pretty unlikely. But since the Quapaw were relocated to that area in 1839, I guess it's possible.
Yeah, I don't buy it, though.
I can't prove or disprove it, but my gut tells me it's made up. There are some other urban legends, although each one of them seems as unlikely as those 2. This one attempts to explain why the spook light seems to sway back and forth like a lantern. One evening, a miner returned to his home to find his cabin burned to the ground and his family missing. Even after his death, he continues to search the road by lantern light for his lost family.
Why does the light, which sounds really cool, why does it have to be a ghost? Like, why can't it just be some other paranormal thing, like an elemental or something?
Well, there have been plenty of people who think that they've debunked the spook light. The most common explanation is
Car headlights, I'm sure.
you'd be correct.
I knew it. I love how people always try to prove that these strange lights are headlights, even though they were seen like decades and decades before cars even existed.
Right. It's either car lights or swamp gas, it seems.
Right.
So the first documented theory was written by a reporter for the Kansas City Star in January of 1936. His name was A.B. McDonald, and he simply stated that the light was from cars. Then in 1945, Dr. George W. Ward from the National Bureau of Standards of the Midwest Research Institute postulated that the light was a refraction of automobile headlights, causing a visual effect of moving, bouncing lights. But it was a year later when the first documented experiment was done. Major Thomas Sheard of Camp Crowder surveyed the area around the Devil's Promenade by air. Then he had a buddy park a car on a road that he speculated could be seen from E50. His buddy flashed the headlights, and because Major Sheard could see them, he concluded that he was right. During the 1940s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers even got involved, doing their own investigation, which they deemed inconclusive. They couldn't come up with an explanation at all. In 1955, 8 young men from Kansas City did their own experiments. They used a 3-inch reflecting astronomer's telescope to observe as many as 7 different lights emanating from passing cars on Route 66. They concluded that because of atmospheric conditions on the Devil's Promenade, the multiple lights appeared as one. Then, in 1965, Popular Mechanic magazine came out and did their own investigation. They noted that even in the daytime, they could see cars passing by on Route 66 at different spots on Devil's Promenade. So it was undoubtedly headlights or taillights being seen at night.
Yeah, but here's my thought about that. Okay. If it's headlights, and say you take into consideration that not all headlights are in the same position on a vehicle, like distance from the ground wise, right? Because trucks might be a little bit higher and so on. And then you take in different atmospheric conditions like fog or rain or cloud cover, and you'd think that the light would behave in the same way each time and it would be the same color each time. But it's not. So if they're truly going to debunk it, as far as I'm concerned, they really have to keep track of what kind of vehicle it was and what the atmospheric conditions were, and does that make the same light anomaly every single time?
Right. And the people who have seen the spook light, like I said, their stories are easy to find online, adamantly deny that what they saw could have been headlights from Route 66 or any other road for that matter. In 1947, a local man named Vance Randolph included his own personal experience with the spook light in his book Ozark Magic and Folklore. He claimed he had seen the light 3 separate times. Sometimes it appeared to be about the size of an egg, but at other times it was as large as a wash tub.
I love that because he's writing the book in 1947, you said, right?
Right.
And so a wash tub is something that most people would be able to relate size to, which I just think is so cool.
Right. He said each time he saw it, it was just one single light, but the other locals said that they saw it split into 3 or 4 smaller lights, or even burst like a bubble, scattering sparks in all directions. According to Randolph, one local man said it passed by so close to him that he could feel the heat radiating off it.
Well, that's not headlights from however many miles away.
Right. Dean Crazy Legs Walker, a volunteer at the Kansas Route 66 Visitor Center, he was also the inspiration of Tow Mater in the Cars animated movies.
Oh, that's cool.
Now, he said that he's seen the spook light several times, but that when he was 8 years old, the light actually floated right through the windshield of the family car. He and his cousins crouched in the back seat because they didn't want it to touch them. Then it just disappeared. Walker isn't the only one who has said that the spook light has actually floated right through their car. I found 2 other accounts, one from a lady named Roberta Williams and another named Mary Roundtree, who both said that the light went right through their car when they were kids.
Huh.
But there are plenty more. Readers wrote into Legends of America website with their own stories. One woman said her grandmother was in a school bus on the Devil's Promenade. At one point, it was common for buses of tourists to go out there and try to see it. Anyways, her grandmother claimed that the light came straight down the road towards their bus, balanced on the hood, and then burst into a blinding light before disappearing. This woman said she had her own encounter also while in high school. She and her family parked on the road and waited. She said there were a few other cars. At one point, they could see an oncoming car coming down the road towards them from the other direction. And there it was. The spook light was actually hovering over the oncoming car. As the car passed by, the taillights were nowhere near as bright as the spook light, which then split into 2. They were horizontal at first, but then they moved so that they were vertical, with one on top of the other. After a few seconds, they reverted back into the horizontal position, merged back together into one light, and then vanished. And finally, a third woman wrote in to share her story as well. She said she's personally seen the spook light divide into 4 glowing balls before changing color from red to blue. She said sometimes the light will be right in front of you, then suddenly it's in back of you. She said she's seen it travel through parked cars, and she's seen it disappear into parked cars. So can that all really be explained by headlights refracting or reflecting from Route 66? I don't know. I guess I'd have to go there and see it for myself.
Yeah, I would like to go and see it for myself, just because I think it sounds really cool.
It does. And I could bring a porta potty for you, so you know.
Always thinking of me, honey.
I know.
You know me so well.
But I've always wanted to go down Route 66 anyway, since I was a young child, so.
That would be cool. Hey, did you know? On January 9th, 1386, in Falaise, France, a pig was arrested, put on trial, and found guilty of murdering an infant. On the day of its execution, the convicted porker was dressed in a waistcoat, gloves, and pants before being hanged for murder. Who'da thunk it?
Did they have bacon the next day?
I knew you were going to say that. I don't think so. I think that they would consider that particular pig tainted, and I don't think they'd eat it. But then maybe they would. That's also a possibility.
Why would you let all that pork go to waste?
But why?
I'd eat it.
Why dress it up like a human first? That's what I really don't understand.
Well, yeah.
I don't
I guess they just like to see humans hang, back then. So.
Well, this is true.
But I bet they ate it after. So, what are you going to tell our listeners about tonight?
Well, the vanishing hitchhiker urban legend has been around forever. I initially assumed that it started when cars were invented, but that's actually not the case. There are even stories about phantom hitchhikers since the days of wagon travel. And they're not just American, of course. They exist all over the world. The stories are all pretty much the same. A lone man is driving when he comes across a young woman in white. He gives her a ride and she either asks to be let out in a strange place, like near a cemetery, or in front of a house. In the case of the cemetery drop-off, the young woman, who generally has pale skin or claims to be very cold, will vanish inside the gates. But if it's a house drop-off, the ghost always leaves a belonging inside the car that the man then tries to return, only to be told by a mother or a father that their daughter passed away years before.
I really love stories about ghost hitchhikers or, any ghosts that are seen on the side of the road.
Right. I mean, we've all heard these stories, these urban legends. Some of them are even based in a kernel of truth, a little tiny bit of truth. Perhaps a young woman did pass away on a specific stretch of road at some point in history, usually due to a drunk driver or a jealous boyfriend. The stories serve as a warning against those things. A see what happened to that poor girl kind of thing. She's destined to spend all of eternity wandering this road where her life ended. But there's an enduring phantom hitchhiker story on Archer Avenue in Chicago that does fit all the criteria of an urban legend. However, this one is a little different because not just a few people have claimed to see her. There are hundreds of reported sightings. Her sightings are so well documented and so common that historians and reporters have even gone to great lengths to try and figure out just who she was in life. I mean, I do realize that Chicago is a big city with a current population of almost 2.7 million people, and I'm sure some people could be imagining things or they could just be making it up. But the story of Resurrection Mary is so well known in Chicago that I thought that we should talk about her.
I love the story of Resurrection Mary.
I know, it's an intriguing one for sure.
It's so cool.
Archer Avenue is a 33.6-mile road that connects just outside the Chicago city limits to Joliet. It was named after William Beatty Archer, who was the first commissioner of the Illinois and Michigan Canal. Originally, though, back in 1830, it was named the Road to Widow Brown's, which has nothing to do with anything, but I just thought it was really cool.
It is pretty cool. So at some time, though, there was a Widow Brown that lived on that road.
And she was important enough to make it on the map.
That's really cool.
Off of Archer Avenue was also one of the Manhattan Project sites, which later became a nuclear reactor disposal site. There's also an abandoned Playland amusement park along that stretch of road. One evening in 1939, Jerry Pallas was at the Liberty Grove Hall at 47th and Mozart when a lovely blonde woman in a white dress caught his eye. He introduced himself and asked her to dance. As he held her hand, he was struck by how ice-cold they were. As the night wore on, he really took a liking to her. They danced together for hours, even sharing a kiss. At closing time, Jerry offered to drive this young woman home. She said she lived in the South Side, but as they got into Jerry's car, she asked him to drive down Archer, which was in the opposite direction. Jerry did do as she asked, though. The young woman, who had become quieter as they drove along, motioned for Jerry to stop near the Resurrection Cemetery. She got out, stepped toward the cemetery gate, and vanished.
That's so creepy. I love it.
Jerry's story continues that despite the strange end to their evening, he was still smitten with her. And the following day, I'm sure after convincing himself that he must have imagined things, he stopped by the South Side home where the young woman had said she lived.
I don't think Jerry cared at this point whether she had cold hands or she was dead. I mean, he found a girl that he thought was really pretty.
I think he was spooked the hell out and was trying to figure out what had happened to him.
Yeah, that too.
And just as you would assume with any phantom hitchhiker legend, the woman who answered the door seemed confused and sad when Jerry explained that he was there to see her daughter. The woman, of course, gently told him that her daughter had passed away 3 years prior. Now, what makes Jerry's story believable is that he stood by this story for the rest of his life, saying it absolutely happened. He never embellished or changed the details.
I believe Jerry.
And from then, countless other people have encountered this young woman, who has come to be known as Resurrection Mary, from Archer to Ashland Avenue to Willow Springs. Another man, who is only known as Vince, had his own reported encounter with Resurrection Mary, which he willingly retold for over 50 years. He, too, never changed his story or embellished it, but his tale also fits the hitchhiking ghost story perfectly. Vince was at the O. Henry Ballroom one night. I love Vince's story because of the specific details. Like he said, he was wearing his favorite gray suit and red tie with Hula Girls printed on it, and he was cruising up and down Archer Avenue in his Chevy Cabriolet, and it was a warm night.
He had Hula Girls on his shirt?
On his tie.
Oh, Jerry is out to get some that night. He was out to impress.
I was going to say he was styling that night. Vince spotted a pretty blonde woman in a white dress, and he built up the courage to ask her to dance. The ballroom was pretty loud, and although the two danced to several songs, it was too loud to really talk to each other very much. But finally, during a slower song, he pulled her close, and like Jerry, was shocked by how cold her hands were. But they were able to talk. She told him that her name was Mary, and she lived on Archer.
Cold hands don't really mean much. Not to me.
No, and one of them, I can't remember which gentleman, but one of them reportedly said, cold hands, warm heart, so he didn't think much of it.
Right.
At the end of the night, he too offered to drive her home. As they approached Resurrection Cemetery, she asked him to pull over. Before he could ask why, Mary opened the car door and stepped out. She said, quote, "I have to go and you can't follow me."
I'd have followed her.
Well,
I would have.
I don't know what to say because I know you would have. There's just no argument. I know you would have followed her. But Vince didn't. Instead, he watched her quite baffled as Mary went up to the locked gate and placed her hands on the iron chain. And then she vanished. Vince, completely shaken, drove around and around, hoping to catch sight of her somewhere. In the morning, when the cemetery opened, he wandered the grounds with trepidation, hoping he wouldn't find a grave with her name on it. Since he didn't actually know her last name, this was pretty easy to do.
Can you imagine going to the cemetery the next day to look for the headstone of the girl you danced with the night before?
No. You really like these stories.
I do. I love these stories.
And if it was just 2 stories about 2 separate men who met a woman who vanished, and then they discovered that she'd passed away years before, then I would say, it's a pretty spooky urban legend and leave it at that. But that's not all there is.
I want to believe it's true because it's so cool.
Well, you might when I'm done because there's so much evidence. Throughout the 1930s, people along Archer Avenue often reported to police that a woman had tried to jump on the running board of their cars as they drove along. In the 1970s, Mary was really active. She was most often seen by cab drivers. One cab driver claimed that he saw a young woman standing in front of the cemetery one night. When he pulled over to ask if she needed a ride, she approached the cab and then disappeared. In 1973, Mary is believed to have shown up at least twice in 1 month at a Southwest Side dance club called Harlow's. Even though bouncers carded everyone entering the club, none of them recalled letting in the blonde woman in the white dress. She caught people's attention due to the strange way she was dancing by herself in a corner. And her dress was rather odd. It looked like a faded wedding gown. Her skin was so pale that it appeared as if covered in white powder. They didn't get a chance to ask her to leave. She apparently did that on her own, although none of the bouncers recalled seeing her exit the club either.
She poofed.
She did.
Right into thin air.
Also in 1973, at Chet's Melody Lounge, which just happens to be across the street from the Resurrection Cemetery, Yet another cab driver had an eerie experience. He had dropped a young blonde woman off, again, in a white dress.
Always the white dress.
But she had left the car and bounded into the lounge without paying the fare. The cab driver went in after her and was told by the confused manager that absolutely no one fitting that description had come into the lounge at all. A few years later, police received a call from yet another worried cab driver. He had spotted a young blonde woman in white inside the locked cemetery gates. He was concerned and asked them to go check it out. They found nothing, of course, except for something that has become almost as well known as Resurrection Mary herself. 2 of the cemetery gate's iron bars had been pried apart. They were darkened with scorch marks, and there appeared to be actual female fingerprints melted into the iron.
Ooh, how did she do that with her cold hands? You think you'd have to have some really hot hands to heat up those, to pull them apart.
That's a good point. You're poking holes in your own wanting to believe in the story.
I believe in her.
When word got out about the bent bars with Mary's fingerprints pressed into them, cemetery workers insisted that it wasn't ghostly at all. A work crew had simply backed into the gate, and the fingerprints were just the imprint of a worker's glove from when he used a blowtorch to try and reshape the bent bars. Skeptics of this explanation point out that it would be kind of difficult to somehow insert something between 2 bars and pry them away from each other sideways simply by backing a truck into them. Like, how does that work?
It doesn't.
And how do heavy work gloves leave such delicate, narrow, female-sized prints?
It's a cover-up is what it is. I just want to see her.
In 1974, a couple was driving down Archer when they saw a woman in white just lying in the middle of the street. Shocked, the man swerved to avoid hitting her, but he was sure he was going to hit her. But he didn't, because the prone woman disappeared before the car made contact. In 1979, another cab driver, this one was named Ralph, claimed to have picked up a young woman who appeared to be around 21 years old. As he drove up Archer, the young woman suddenly cried out for him to stop. They were in front of what looked like an abandoned shack. Ralph questioned if this was really where she wanted to be dropped off, and instead of answering, she just shimmered and disappeared. In 1980, Mark and Claire Rudnicki were driving down Archer Avenue toward the Resurrection Cemetery when they spotted a young woman in a white gown slowly walking down the side of the road. As they got closer, they realized that she didn't look entirely human. She was partially transparent. They drove past her and then did a quick U-turn to see if they could drive by her again, but she had already completely vanished. And so, for the next 2 decades, these types of encounters with Resurrection Mary just kept happening. Except, in more recent years, Mary seems to be changing. Not the way she looks. She was still always seen in white, and she has blonde hair, but her personality seems to be altered. Where once she was sweet and lovely, the newer accounts of her make her seem frantic and confused.
Well, that's unusual.
In 1989, a woman named Janet Kalau was out for an evening drive with a friend when they drove by Resurrection Cemetery. Janet swears a young woman in white jumped in front of her car. It happened so fast she didn't have time to swerve like the couple did back in 1974. Janet hit the woman, except the impact made no sound. In fact, for her and her passenger, it hadn't felt like there was any impact at all. The 2 women got out of the car, still fearing the worst, I'd imagine, but there was no woman in white anywhere. There wasn't a single mark on the car. It was as if nothing had happened. And this second case of almost hitting Resurrection Mary wasn't the last. In the next decade, people continued to have the unnerving sensation of almost hitting a phantom woman in white at least twice more that I could find. Also in the late 80s, 2 teenage boys described seeing a woman in white dancing strangely down Archer Avenue along the cemetery fence. They thought it was weird, but they also thought it was strange that no one else passing by even seemed to notice her. But then, in 1989, the sightings of Mary continued to become even more concerning. A cab driver, yet again, reportedly picked up a lone woman outside the Old Willow Shopping Center. It was January and incredibly cold, but the woman wore only a white party dress and delicate dancing shoes. The young woman got into the front passenger seat, and she was able to tell the driver that she wanted to go home, somewhere on Archer Avenue. As he tried to make small talk, she seemed very confused, as though she couldn't answer his questions. But she did remark, quote, "The snow came early this year."
That's weird.
This cabbie stopped in front of that old shack that Ralph had mentioned a decade earlier, and then the girl just simply disappeared. So there have been some attempts over the years to try and figure out just who Resurrection Mary really was. I mean, how could there not be when there's hundreds and hundreds of sightings? Like, people want to know who she could be.
Exactly.
The first possibility was a woman named Mary Bregovy, who was buried in Resurrection Cemetery. Mary was struck by a car and killed in 1934 when she was 21 years old. Mary was a Polish woman who was on her way home from a dance at the O. Henry Ballroom. People believed she could be a possibility, since a Resurrection Cemetery caretaker swore he saw Mary Bregovy's ghost walking through the cemetery, and he named her specifically. Mary did love to dance, and she was described as a very sweet young woman. Her family had also buried her in a term plot, and some people argued that her spirit was at unrest after the term expired, and her remains had to be moved to another spot in the cemetery. There's a few problems, though. Mary Bregovy didn't have blonde hair. Her hair was actually dark and cut short. She also wasn't wearing a white dress the night she died. She was wearing purple. And the accident that took her life didn't happen anywhere near Archer Avenue, but in the downtown Loop district.
I always find it so weird how they always come back with a white dress.
Yeah, that's very, very common in so many different hauntings. And I mean, I think it's possible that Mary Bregovy's ghost could be in the cemetery too.
Why not?
But she's not the hitchhiking ghost.
Right.
Another possibility is Anna Majira Norkus. She unfortunately was also killed in a car crash on the way back from a party at the O. Henry Ballroom in 1927. Many people to this day believe that she is the most likely contender. However, there's a problem with that too. According to newspaper articles detailing the accident, Anna was only 12 years old. So, maybe someone will figure out exactly who Resurrection Mary is someday. But for now, we just don't know. What I do know is that there are just so many sightings, it's hard to believe that Resurrection Mary is just an urban legend. But then again, maybe she is.
Yeah, but if it's an urban legend, I can see that, to spook kids. But it's adults.
And it's all cab drivers.
Over and over and over.
So many of them are cab drivers.
Right.
And that to me says something too.
Yeah, it is very strange. But, now with, the Tesla and things like that, or even everybody having GoPros in their cars, somebody's going to pick this up eventually.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah,
That's exciting.
Think about it. Everybody's got GoPros in their car. Or it was a couple of years ago, we heard about the Tesla in the graveyard that kept stopping because it has like an SLR, motion detector camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. What I had thought about, though, is, we just did the episode on tulpas.
Right.
And I was thinking, her story's been retold and retold for since 1939?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a possibility that she's a tulpa at this point.
It could be.
Which is kind of sad.
That it is.
You know?
And I don't like the paranormal being all passed off on tulpas because I know what I've seen in the past. And I like to believe there's more out there that I haven't seen, like Resurrection Mary.
Right.
I'd just like to see her. I wouldn't mind dancing with her, cold hands or not. She sounds kind of pretty.
Pretty? I thought you were going to say sounds like she knows how to have fun. Not that she's pretty. Well, I'm glad you find the hitchhiking ghost story fascinating. I don't, but when I read about her, I was like, this is just, there's so much, you know? There has to be some truth to it.
There has to be. Well, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode, Beth.
All right, I think so. And like always, you can check our sources in our show notes to read more about it if you would like to.
That's right. They're always there now because I remind Beth to put them in each and every time.
I put them in each and every time. You have to remind me to say it during each episode that they're there. But I always put them there. I just forget to tell people that they're there.
Right. Okay, I guess we'll see all you wanderers next week for an all-new episode of Where Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
Thank you all for your continued support.
See you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.